Dear students, today we are going to discuss on the topic pedigree analysis. When we talk about the pedigree, it is usually derived from a Anglo-Norman French word which means crane's foot. It simply, we can say that it is the representation of the genetic information of particularly human beings, but the animals are also taken care of when we put the genetic information in the form of a chart with the help of the lines and symbols. We call this as the pedigree. Now, when symbols and the lines are used to make a family tree to represent persons family history, it is called pedigree. In pedigree, symbols are used to represent the people and the lines are used to represent the genetic information. Simply, a pedigree displays a family tree and shows the members of the family who are affected by a genetic trait. A diagrammatic representation that shows the occurrence and appearance of phenotypes of the particular gene or organism and its ancestors from one generation to next, most commonly human beings, dogs, and race horses. We call such a diagrammatic representation as the pedigree chart. 2. Before moving on to the analysis of the pedigree chart, we must be knowing that what are the symbols and what is the meaning of the lines which are used for their representation in a chart. When we see a square, I'm just showing you. When we see a square, it represents a male. When a circle is there, it represents a female. When a diamond is there, it represents sex unspecified. And when a diamond has inside 5 number, it means 5 unaffected offsprings are born. When a circle has an inner core which is blackened, it is a carrier female. And when the square, circle, and diamond, they represent the unaffected individuals when they are white, or they are usually shown by the light colors. And when these very square, circle, and diamond are represented by the black color, it means it is the affected individual. When there is a line between the square and the circle, it means this male married to this female and both are normal, that is they are not having any kind of disease. And here we are saying that here in the normal male has married to a normal female, but the children born, it is child born, it is a male child, but it is a diseased. And here we are seeing that the male married to a female, that is square, married to a circle, or a male married to a female, they both give rise to two offsprings. One is female, that is in circle, this one, and this one is male. And again, I am telling you that this very horizontal line, it represents the mating between these two or the marriage between these two, and this very vertical line, it represents the progeny or the offsprings. Now here in the offsprings born are we count them from the left to the right direction. It means their first progeny, their first offspring is female, and the second offspring is male. So the offsprings are always presented from left to right, and we depict a generation by the Arabic numeral, whereas we depict individuals with the Roman numerals. We depict these very with the Roman numerals. Okay, then if the circle has a cross line, or square has a cross line, it means the death has occurred, or the male has died, or the female has died. When we see that the square and the female have two lines to connect them, it means they have married, they have mated, but they are in close relation. It means the marriage is between the relatives, or it is a consanguineous marriage. Now, let us analyze this very chart. Let us analyze this very chart. We are seeing here, that this very normal female married to a affected male. Normal female married to a affected male, and they gave rise to two daughters, and both the daughters, this one and this one, they are diseased. It means this very chart analyzes that these very founder parents, they married among themselves, that this is the female, this is the female, and this is the male. Herein female is normal, but male is diseased. A normal female married to a diseased man, and they gave rise to two offsprings. The first one is girl, and the second one is again girl. And this very girl, when reached adulthood, she married to a normal male. She married to a, this is a normal male, and they gave rise to two progenies. The first one was daughter, and the second one was male. And we are seeing here that this very male is a diseased male, and this diseased male, when married to a normal female, they gave rise to a male which is not diseased, which is a normal male. So by this representation, we can analyze the chart, that yes, this is the chart depicting the, by the lines and by the symbols, we can see that that they this is a pedigree chart. When we talk about this very pedigree chart, each generation is identified by a each generation is identified by a Roman numeral. This is first generation, so 1. This is the second generation, so it is 2. This is 2, and this is the third generation, and this is 3, and this is the fourth generation. Here it is depicted here, the last one, it is a fourth generation, and hence depicted by the Roman numeral. And the individuals in each generation is represented by a Arabic numeral. This is 1, this is 2, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. In the third generation, we again have 3 individuals. In the fourth generation, we have 1 individual. So this is a method wherein we can present the information of a particular generation and their progenies in the form of a chart, and that is why this very chart is called as the pedigree chart. Now, when we talk the analysis of the pedigree using the principles of the Mendelian inheritance can determine whether the trait has a dominant or a recessive pattern. So by this pedigree chart, we can also analyze whether this very trait is a dominant trait or this is a recessive trait. Now, pedigrees are often constructed after a family member affected with a genetic disorder has been identified. So pedigrees are usually constructed when we see that there is a sign, there are some of the individuals who are affected by by a certain disease. So we call a genetist, and he inquires that whether your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents, what was their condition, and he tries to make a chart to see whether the disease is a dominant one or a recessive one. So the member of a family who comes first in attention is called propositus. This is one important thing we usually ask an objective, that the member of a family who comes first in attention is called as propositus. Students, let us analyze another chart here. We are seeing here that in this very chart we are seeing that a normal female, I'm going to annotate here, we are seeing here that this normal female married to a normal man and gave rise to two offsprings. The first one is a female and the second one is a male. But the male here, we are seeing that he is affected by certain kind of disease, and this very diseased male married to a normal female and gave rise to four offsprings. The first one is male, the second one is male, both are normal. The third one is female, it is a normal female. But the fourth one here, we are seeing here that it is a male, but it is a affected male. Now, what do the scientists want to represent by these very, what infer from these very charts? On the basis of the information gathered from these very trees, from these very, you can say, pedigree charts, by these family trees, they try to determine the mode of the inheritance of a trait. That what kind of inheritance is followed by this very trait, and it helps to answer two questions. The first question is that, are there patterns within the pedigree which have the consistent and a particular mode of inheritance? That is, are they following a consistent kind of the pattern with a particular mode, or they are following an inconsistent pattern? Now, by this very pedigree chart, the scientists simply want to infer whether the disease which is in a family, it is following a kind of the consistent pattern in a particular mode, or an inconsistent pattern is being followed by a disease. That is why these pedigree charts are made. Now, pedigrees are very much interesting and can be used to do some detective work as well. And the pedigrees are analyzed to determine the mode of the transmission of the genetic disease, for which we should be having an idea that if the disease, if the disease is a dominant disease, it means that the disease alleles are dominant or recessive. When we talk about the dominance of a disease, we have to talk about whether the alleles present in a particular kind of the family tree, or the in a particular kind of disease, they are dominant or recessive. The first thing we have to find out whether the trait is a dominant or a recessive trait, and secondly, what kind of linkage it has, whether it is a X-linked gene, whether it is a autosomal. If it is present on the sex chromosome, it is a sex-linked, you can say, disorder. If it is not on a sex chromosome, whether X or whether Y, it is a autosomal. So whether it is a X-linked or it is autosomal, we have to see this also. And secondly, if we talk about the autosomal chromosome, we know that the 22 chromosome pairs, other than XX in the case of female and XY in the case of males, they are sex chromosomes, whereas 22 chromosomes in are autosomal chromosomes. Now, when we talk about this very hemizygous condition, this is the hemizygous condition is found in the case of males, wherein we clearly see that the male is constituted of two sex chromosomes, that is X and Y. That is, the X has no other allele and Y also has no other allele. Whereas in the case of females, we call it as the homozygous because there are two X chromosomes. One has the allele for the other. So there are two X chromosomes. The chances are there that if one of the X chromosome is diseased, the other can play a role in just you can say camouflaging the disease. Now, when we talk about the allele, uh, it is a version of the gene that the humans have two alleles of all their autosomal genes. Yes, all the genes have the two alleles. The females have two alleles of the X-linked genes, whereas the males have one allele of the X-linked genes. Whereas in other 22, you can say autosomes, the each and every you can say chromosome has the allele for every kind of the trait. Now we will directly move. Dear students, we are moving to one of the important slides, that is the 5 key clues. These are the very much important for the solution of the pedigree problems. So a student usually should keep all these 5 clues in mind, and he should have a clear cut idea about these very points so that he will be easily able to solve the problems of the pedigree. The point number one is that an affected individual cannot have any alleles of a dominant trait. An unaffected individual cannot have any allele of a dominant trait. It means if the individual is not affected by a certain kind of disease, it means he is not having any dominant allele for the disease. If individual is healthy, but he can be a carrier, he can be a carrier. But if he is diseased, it means he is having a dominant trait. If he is unaffected, it means he is not having any allele for the dominant trait of the disease. Point number two. This was the point number one. Point number two is that individuals marrying into family are assumed to have no disease alleles. Many a times it is in those very cases wherein we think that the trait is rare in population. They can never be affected and can never be carriers of the recessive trait, as the trait is rare in population. So only in the case when the trait is rare in population, this very point is valid. Point number three, an unaffected individual can be a carrier of a recessive trait. Yes, I have talked about this in the point number one, that unaffected individual, even though he looks normal, he is not having a certain kind of disease, but he can be a carrier of a particular kind of disease because he may be having that very allele in the recessive form. That is, as the two alleles of a recessive trait are required for an individual to be affected. If this very unaffected individual would have been in a condition wherein it may be having the two alleles and both recessive, two alleles, both recessive, even though the disease was should have been there. If the individual is unaffected, it means he can be a carrier with one allele, with one allele, and that too recessive. If it would have been dominant, it would have been expressed. Point number four, when a trait is X-linked, a single recessive allele is sufficient for a male to be affected. Yes, the males are hemizygous. They have only one X chromosome. And if that very X chromosome is affected, it means the disease will be there. The males, as I told you, they are hemizygous. They have only one allele of an X-linked trait, and that is why if there is an allele which is, even if which is for a particular kind of disease, it will be expressed. It will be expressed. Point number 5 is that the father transmits his X-linked gene to his daughter, but not to his son. Yes, it is the mother which transmits an allele of X-linked genes to both her daughter and the son. So when we talk about the daughter, it is X, X, and when we talk about the son, it is X, Y. Now when we talk about this very X is from mother, this very X is from mother. So 1x to daughter from mother, 1x to daughter, son from mother. Now this very x to the daughter is from father, and this very x y from son is from father. So father gives 1x and 1y, whereas mother gives 2x chromosome. So it is obvious that a father transmits his X-linked gene to his daughter and not to his sons, because son is getting this very X chromosome from the mother only and the Y chromosome from the father. So father cannot transmit the allele of X-linked gene to his daughter. So sorry, the father transmits his X-linked gene to his daughter, but not to his son. So X-linked gene to his daughter. So this X is from father, this X is from mother, whereas the son is not getting any X chromosome from the father. Dear students, now let us look at some of the patterns of the inheritance of the disease, either autosomal, either X-linked, either dominant or recessive. Now, first of all, we shall be talking about the patterns that indicate a recessive trait. For example, in this very picture, there are three pictures in this very diagram. This is the first one, this is the second one, and this is the third one. Now, in this picture, we clearly depict here that the son, the affected son, has unaffected parents. Here in the affected daughter, that is diseased daughter, has unaffected parents. This is the mother of the son, this is the father of the son, this is the mother of the daughter, and this is the father of the daughter. Herein, what we are seeing, that the disease must be recessive if any affected individual has two unaffected parents. So here what we are seeing, that the two parents are unaffected, so it means the disease is recessive. It is obvious that the disease is recessive. But what is there to be learned by you extra, that this is a genetic disease, that at least one parent must have an allele for this very disease. It means thou these two parents, that is mother and father, were unaffected, that is they were not having a kind of the disease, any kind of disease, but they were carrier for the disease, that is they were having an allele for the disease. And it is now obvious from this very picture that this very daughter which had unaffected, that is none of the parents were having any kind of disease, but its grandparent were having the disease. It means the disease were transmitted from this very parent to this very offspring, and from this very parent to this very offspring. So it means that one of the parent must have the allele for the disease, and if the parent is affected, the trait cannot be dominant. So if neither parent are affected, if neither parent is affected, then the trait cannot be dominant. It is obvious that the trait is recessive only. Now, how can we find out that this very disease is an autosomal recessive disease? Now, when we are seeing here that the individual or a founding daughter has two unaffected parents, it is obvious that it is an autosomal recessive disease. Why it is an autosomal recessive disease? Because if the affected individual must inherit a recessive allele from both the parents, so this very daughter is having a recessive allele from the father, one recessive allele from father and one recessive allele from the mother, because they both are having, they both are the carriers and both are having a recessive allele for the same. And that is why those very recessive alleles, when both alleles came together, the daughter was diseased one. If the father had a recessive X-linked allele, uh, if this very father had an X-linked recessive allele, then he would have to be affected. Then he must have been diseased. So it is not a X-linked disease, but it is a autosomal recessive disease. If the daughter is affected and both the parents are unaffected, it means it is a autosomal recessive disease. Now we will continue with this very recessive kind of diseases. Now here again, what we are seeing here, that this very male child has both the parents unaffected. Now here we cannot determine if the recessive disease is autosomal or X-linked. Now here there's going to, in the case of girl child, it is obvious that it cannot be a X-linked. But in the case of male child, we cannot determine if the recessive disease is autosomal or X-linked. If the trait is autosomal, both parents can be affected. If the trait is autosomal, both parents can be unaffected carriers of the disease. Now, if it is autosomal, both parents can be carriers. Now here again, like the earlier slide, if the disease is autosomal, then both have to be the carrier. But if the trait is X-linked, the son must have inherited his allele from his mother only, and his father can be unaffected. If the trait is X-linked, now for a trait to be X-linked, the his mother, he must have inherited his allele from the mother only, and father can be unaffected. So in this very case, either it is the autosomal recessive, or if the trait is X-linked, the son must have inherited his allele from the mother only, and the father can be unaffected. The third condition, what we are going to see here, is that when an affected son has two unaffected parents. Now here we are seeing that this very son has two unaffected parents. The disease must be X-linked recessive. When this son has two unaffected parents, then the disease must be X-linked recessive disease. Now why? The father who is marrying in does not have any disease. This He is not having any kind of disease alleles, since he is marrying into the family, because he is not a member of the family. He has come from outer side. The daughter is from the family and the male has come from the outer side, so he does not have any disease allele for this very disease. So the affected son inherits the allele only from his affected mother. So it is obvious that this very son inherits an allele only from his unaffected mother. So this very mother, though she is looking unaffected, but she might be carrier of a disease. Now a male cannot be affected by single autosomal recessive allele. Now here this is the male, he cannot be affected by a single autosomal recessive allele, but can be affected by the single X-linked recessive allele. So he can be affected by a single X-linked recessive allele. So this very allele she might have received from the mother as carrier, So this is the X-linked recessive disorder. Now again we will discuss this later, but this is a son who has two unaffected parents. Um, so clearly indicating that this disease must be X-linked recessive disease. The father who is marrying in, this is the father who is marrying in, is not from the family, but he has come from the outer side and he is marrying into the family. So the son inherits the allele only from his unaffected mother. So this is the unaffected mother. It means he has not received this very allele from the father. He must have received this very allele from the unaffected mother. Now, next point is that the male cannot be affected by a single autosomal recessive allele. So, if one allele he has got from the mother, from where he has got the next allele, but can be affected by the single X-linked recessive allele. So, this very disease is a X-linked. If he has not got this from the father, there is only one allele which is represented in the son. So, that is obvious that very disease he has received from the X chromosome from the mother, who was having it as a carrier allele, and this very allele, when presented in the son, he got infected. So this is the X-linked recessive. Now, when we talk about the patterns of the dominant trait, what are the patterns of the dominant trait? These were the patterns of the recessive trait. Now we have to talk about the patterns of the dominant trait. For a dominant for a disease, the disease must be dominant if every affected child of the non-founding parents has an affected parent. So what we are seeing here in this very case, the disease must be dominant if every affected child of non-founding parents has an affected parent. Now what we are seeing here, that this is a male child which is a diseased, and among these two parents, the one of the parent is affected, and this very parent born out of the grandparents, here the mother was affected. So it means that when the trait is present from in every generation, and it is affecting the both sons and the daughters, it means that it is a dominant disease. The unaffected mother who is marrying in does not carry an allele of the disease, so the affected child inherits an allele only from the affected father. No child could be affected by the single autosomal recessive allele or X-linked recessive allele, so the trait is dominant. So no child could be affected by a single autosomal recessive allele. Here we are clearly seeing that none of the child is affected by the single autosomal recessive allele or X-linked recessive allele, so the trait is dominant. Here this very disease trait is dominant. It is not a recessive trait, it is a dominant trait. Now we will look at some of the patterns which indicate a dominant trait. Now we have two examples here, two depictions, two pedigree charts here, which indicate a dominant trait. The first in the first picture, what we are seeing, that this very son of the parents has an affected father. That is, it means this son has an affected father. The disease, if the son of the non-founding parents has an affected father, the disease must be autosomal. Now, again here, if the father does not transmit X-linked alleles to a son, so the disease cannot be X-linked dominant, because X-linked disease cannot be transmitted from the father to son. It is always from the mother to son. So it cannot be X-linked allele. The father does not transmit X-linked allele to a son. In the second scenario, what we are seeing here, when an affected daughter of non-founding parents has an affected father, if instead of the son it is a daughter, and the father is affected we cannot determine whether the dominant disease is autosomal or recessive. Now here it becomes difficult for us to determine whether the disease is autosomal or recessive. Now here the affected father can transmit either an autosomal dominant allele or an X-linked dominant allele to his daughter. So here the condition is that daughter can be diseased only if the father can transmit either autosomal dominant allele or X-linked dominant allele to his daughter. So scenario number 2, in the case of the son, we clearly depicted that it is a autosomal dominant disease. But in the case of daughter, it can be autosomal dominant or X-linked dominant, because in the case of daughter it has to be X-linked dominant as well, because in the case of daughter there are two X chromosomes. If one is having a healthy allele and one is having a diseased allele, the healthy will prevail. But in the case of daughters, either the disease should be dominant one. If it is present on only one X chromosome, then it should be a dominant. So in the case of daughter, it can be autosomal dominant or it can be X-linked dominant allele. Now we will study some of the patterns, and then you will be able to solve all those very problems. The first of all, we will talk about again it is a similar kind of depiction. We will again discuss it. What is the characteristic feature of the autosomal recessive inheritance? Now keep in mind, if a trait skips generation, point number 1, trait skips generation. Second point is that males and females are affected equally. If both the parents are affected, then all children should be affected. If both the parents are affected, then all children should be affected. In most cases, if unaffected people mate with affected individuals, all children produced are unaffected. If one child is affected, it indicates that the unaffected parent is heterozygous, then half of the children should be affected. And most affected children have unaffected parents. Now, first of all, what we are seeing here in this very case, that this very traits skips generation. The first point I talked about, that okay, this is a disease. It is present in this very generation, this is number 2 and this is number 3. What we are seeing here, that the disease is present in generation number 1, but it is not present in generation number 2. This very generation it is not present, but it is present in generation 3. It means the trait skips generation. And secondly, males and females are affected. Both parents are if both so firstly males and females are affected equally, and if both the parents are affected, then the children born to such parents are affected. In most cases, if unaffected people mate with the affected individuals, the children's produced are unaffected, because the disease is recessive disease. That is why they must be having another allele which saves them from being diseased. If the child is affected, it means that if the child is affected, it indicates that the unaffected parents is heterozygous. Now if the child is affected, it means both the parents of that very child are heterozygous. That is, they are giving him the allele for the disease to be the prevalent. Now, what is the pattern of the autosomal dominant inheritance? In this case, traits should not skip generation. The first important point is that in the first case, this is the generation 1, this is generation 2, and this is generation 3. Herein we are seeing that the parents are diseased, the offsprings are diseased, and again the grandsons or the granddaughters are diseased. So it does not skip generation. The first point is that it does not skip generation. If an affected person mates with unaffected person, if an affected person mates with unaffected person, they should produce approximately 50% of the affected offspring. So herein what we are seeing that this is 1 and this is 2, 50% of the offsprings are affected, indicating that the affected individuals as the heterozygous. The trait affects both the sexes almost equally. So it is not that it affects only one kind of sex. No, it affects both the sexes equally. The trait is transmitted by either sex. It can be transmitted either through the female or through the male. So in this very case, in the case of autosomal dominant inheritance, the trait, this very trait, both the sexes almost equally. They affect both the sexes equally, and it is transmitted by either sex. When we talk about the sex-linked or recessive inheritance, what we see in this very case, most of the affected individuals are male. Most of the affected individuals are male. When we talk about the sex-linked recessive inheritance, most of the affected individuals are male. Though the females are also affected, but most of the affected individuals are male. The affected males result from the mothers who have either affected or carriers. It is now what we are seeing here. Either the males are born out of the mothers who are either affected or carriers. And herein we are seeing that this very mother is affected and it has given rise to the sons which are affected. The sons of the affected females should be affected. It is obvious that the sons of the affected, in the case of X-linked, in the case of sex-linked, X-linked recessive inheritance, the sons of the affected mothers are always affected, and approximately half of the sons should be affected, and approximately half of the sons should be affected. Now, when we talk about the sex-linked dominant inheritance or X-linked dominant inheritance, what we are seeing that the trait does not skip generation. Here, the trait is not skipping the generation. It is present in generation 1. It is present in generation 2. It is present in generation 3. What we are seeing that trait does not skip generation. Affected males come from the affected mothers. The males, affected males, come from the affected females or the males, and approximately 50% of the affected heterozygous mothers are affected, and approximately 50% of the children of an affected heterozygous mothers are affected. 50%. And all daughters of the affected fathers are affected. Now here in this very case we are seeing that the father is affected, and here what we are seeing, the both daughters are affected. So all the daughters of the affected fathers are affected, but no son is affected if the father is affected. If the father is affected, in the case of X-linked dominant inheritance, all the daughters born to such a father are affected, but no father are affected, because the no sons are affected, because sons are getting the X chromosome directly from the mother. Directly from the mother, we are getting X chromosome from the mother. But herein they are getting X chromosome from the father. They are getting X chromosome from the father. That is why the daughters of the affected fathers are affected, but no son is affected. Now, talking lastly about the Y-linked inheritance. Y-linked inheritance. In this case, this is a very simple, because Y chromosome is not found in the not found in females. It is only found in males. That is why it affects only males. What we are seeing here, only males are affected. Only males are affected. It is the only male, and all sons of the affected father are affected. So this is the important clue. This is the important this very outcome of the Y-linked inheritance, that it affects only males, and all the males have the all the affected males have the affected father, and all sons of the affected father are affected. Thank you very much. This was all about the pedigree analysis. That how do we analyze a pedigree chart? How do we depict a pedigree chart? And what is the requirement? Why do we make a pedigree chart? Because it was a scientist who thought that it is very much difficult for the humans to cross them and to record their data. So they tried to make a pedigree chart based on the inquiry from the family members about the disease present in their family, and they tried to depict that in the form the chart, and thus this very chart came into being. And it is not only the human beings who are recorded for such a kind of the chart, but the economically important animals, such as cows, such as horses, such as dogs, they are also recorded, and their pedigree is also noted down for the prevalence of the diseases, or to make the races better. Thank you very much. Next time we shall be dealing with the problems dealing with the pedigree. Thank you very much.